I'm Jason Hines from Lenoir Fire, and I've been asked to read a book to you by your media coordinator. And the book I've chose today is one of my favorite because I love the pictures in it and I love the adventure. It's David McPhail's Edward in the Jungle. Edward loved to read. He especially loved to read adventure stories. His favorite stories were about Tarzan, Lord of the Jungle. Tarzan was raised by great gray apes. He grew up to become their leader. All the animals loved him, except the crocodiles, and they would come to his aid whenever they called. Edward had set all of his animals just like in the Tarzan jungle, without the zebra. One day, Edward took all of his animals into the jungle behind his house. He spread them out all around him, and he laid back in the cool moss and opened another Tarzan adventure. Edward was so absorbed in reading, he didn't notice what was happening. When he finally looked up, the enormous crocodile was coming towards him. The crocodile lunged at Edward, but at that instant, Edward snatched up out of the way by none other than Tarzan himself. A moment later, and they were swinging through the trees on a sturdy vine. When they were safe distance from the crocodile, Tarzan landed on a branch of a large tree and set Edward down. "I'll teach you what to do if you ever need help and I'm not around," said Tarzan. He tipped back his head and yelled the loudest yell Edward had ever heard. A booming call that echoed through every part of the jungle. Immediately, the branches around them were filled with all manners of birds, monkeys, snakes, and climbing cats. On the ground, a huge elephant appeared and was soon joined by every other animal that Edward could read about. Tarzan raised his hand and all the animals grew quiet. "This is our new friend," he announced. "Watch over him." Tarzan waved his arm and all the animals disappeared as quickly as they arrived. "I have to go pull a stuck hippo out of the mud," Tarzan told Edward. "Wait here." Then he grabbed a vine and swung away. Edward looked around. Crouched on a branch below him was a leopard, and standing on the ground beneath the leopard was a small antelope. Edward leaned over and tried to warn the antelope without disturbing the big cat. "Psst! Run for your life," he whispered. But he had leaned over too far, lost his grip, and went tumbling out of the tree past the wide-eyed leopard and plop! Right on the back of the antelope. The antelope was so startled that it galloped away as fast as it could. With Edward's arms wrapped tightly around its neck, it raced along the riverbank, leaping fallen logs and charging through the tangled thickets. Suddenly, the antelope stopped short, and Edward went flying. He landed on the soft moss of the riverbank, in the exact same spot where he had first met the crocodile. The crocodile was still there, but he was completely tied up, and two men were loading him in the boat. "Serves him right," thought Edward. "That crocodile's no friend of mine." But then Edward's heart softened. As unfriendly as the crocodile was, he didn't deserve to be bound and dragged away from his river home. Edward stepped forward and said, "Let him go," he said to the men. And when the men looked up and saw Edward, they laughed. "And what will you do if we don't?" one of the men said. "This is what I'll do," said Edward, and he drew in a deep breath and tried to yell the way Tarzan had taught him. But instead of a mighty yell, a squeaky noise came out of Edward's mouth. So Edward tried again. This time, a powerful sound poured out of him and echoed through the jungle. The men stopped laughing, and from the silence followed new sounds emerged. The sounds of flapping wings and hoofs pounding. Immediately the trees was filled with all kinds of creatures, and a circle of animals surrounded the two men. "Now will you let the crocodile go?" Edward asked. The men dropped the crocodile, splash, jumped into their boat, and sped off. Edward untied the rope that bound the great beast, and without even a word of thanks, the crocodile slowly swam away. "You did a good thing," said Tarzan as he swung down and landed beside Edward. The two of them stood watching the crocodile. Something caught Edward's eye. He saw the top of his house appear above the trees on the other side of the river. He could see his bedroom window with the jungle-patterned curtains. Edward looked up at Tarzan. "If I had a boat," Tarzan said, "I would take you home." Just then, the crocodile turned around and swam back. "I think he wants to help you," said Tarzan. Edward climbed on the back of the crocodile and sat down. The crocodile paddled off, and when they got to the opposite bank, Edward leaped ashore. He turned to say thank you, but the crocodile had sunk out of sight. And as he started up the path to his house, Edward thought he heard Tarzan yell, but it was just his father calling him home for dinner. Now, I know a lot of you are stuck at home, can't go out, can't go to school, but if you read your books, you can take adventures just like Edward did with Tarzan's adventure. And just remember, just like the crocodile might not seem like a good friend, sometimes even those that seem unfriendly, they need a friend too. Have a good day and read your books.